The Johnson family's move to the glass house was supposed to mark a fresh start. John and Sarah Johnson had been searching for a new home for months, wanting a change from the suburban sprawl. When they stumbled upon the listing for the glass house, it seemed like a dream come true. Nestled deep within a dense forest, the house promised tranquility and an escape from the bustle of city life. Its design was breathtakingly modern, with walls made entirely of one-way glass, offering panoramic views of the surrounding nature while ensuring complete privacy from the outside world. As they drove up the gravel driveway, their anticipation peaked. The house gleamed in the afternoon sun, reflecting the verdant foliage around it. "It's like a sanctuary," Sarah whispered, eyes wide with awe. John parked the car, and the children, Emma and Jake, sprang out, eager to explore their new home. The interior of the house was just as stunning as the exterior. The open floor plan made the space feel enormous, with natural light flooding in through the glass walls. The living room featured minimalist furniture that complemented the house's sleek design. A state-of-the-art kitchen with stainless steel appliances made Sarah's eyes light up with possibilities for new culinary adventures. Upstairs, the bedrooms were spacious and airy, each offering stunning views of the forest canopy. Emma and Jake immediately claimed their rooms, excitedly discussing where to place their furniture and posters. "I can't believe we get to live here," Jake exclaimed, his face pressed against the glass as he gazed at the towering trees outside. Emma, more reserved than her younger brother, wandered around, taking in the house's unique features. She found herself drawn to a small nook in the living room, where a plush armchair was perfectly positioned to overlook a beautiful garden just outside. As John and Sarah unpacked the last of the boxes, they couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over them. "This is it, Sarah. This is our new beginning," John said, wrapping his arms around her. Sarah nodded, smiling as she rested her head on his shoulder. Despite the excitement of the move, a slight shiver ran down her spine. She attributed it to exhaustion and the unfamiliarity of the new house. That night, they celebrated their first evening in the glass house with a simple dinner. They sat around the dining table, the setting sun casting a golden glow through the glass walls. "To our new home," John toasted, raising his glass. The clink of their glasses echoed softly in the spacious room. After dinner, they settled into their routines. Sarah read a book in the cozy nook. John set up his home office, and the kids played in the yard until dusk. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the house, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The once inviting glass walls now felt like barriers, separating them from the safety of the outside world. Emma, while brushing her teeth, felt an inexplicable sense of being watched. She glanced out the bathroom window, but all she saw was her reflection and the dark forest beyond. "Mom, do you ever feel like someone's watching us?" Emma asked tentatively, as Sarah tucked her into bed. Sarah chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Emma's forehead. "It's just the newness of the place, sweetheart. It'll take some getting used to. Besides, no one can see us in here," she reassured, although she couldn't completely dismiss the unease she felt herself. In the master bedroom, John and Sarah lay in bed, talking about their plans for the house and their excitement for the future. Yet as they drifted off to sleep, Sarah's dreams were filled with unsettling images. She found herself wandering through the house, which seemed to stretch into infinity, with shadows lurking just beyond the glass walls, their eyes fixed on her every move. Meanwhile, John was jolted awake by a soft, persistent flickering of the lights in his home office. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up and noticed his computer screen showing brief bursts of static. "Must be a power issue," he muttered to himself, deciding to check it out in the morning. In their beds, Emma and Jake slept soundly, unaware of the foreboding atmosphere that had settled over their new home. As the house stood silent and dark, its glass walls reflected the moonlight, giving it an almost ethereal glow. Outside, hidden among the trees, unseen eyes watched the family, their presence unnoticed, yet palpably felt by the house's new occupants. The initial excitement of moving into the glass house gradually gave way to a creeping sense of unease. Days turned into weeks, and the Johnson family began to notice small but unsettling anomalies. What started as subtle disturbances slowly escalated, making them question their sanctuary. One crisp autumn evening, John was working late in his home office, a minimalist space with a sleek glass desk and ergonomic chair. The room offered a stunning view of the forest, now bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. He was engrossed in a work project when the lights flickered briefly, causing him to glance up from his computer. The screen showed a momentary flash of static, then returned to normal. "Must be a power surge," he thought, frowning slightly. As he continued to work, the flickering persisted. John's irritation grew. He decided to check the house's electrical system, assuming there might be a loose connection. Grabbing a flashlight, he made his way to the basement, where the circuit breaker was located. The basement, a cold and unfinished space, always made him uneasy. The stark concrete walls and exposed pipes added to the unsettling atmosphere. John methodically inspected the circuit breaker, but everything appeared to be in order. Just as he was about to leave, he heard faint, indistinct whispers. He paused, straining to listen, but the sound stopped as abruptly as they had started. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to stress and exhaustion, then returned to his office, hoping the issue would resolve itself. Meanwhile, Sarah's nights were plagued by disturbing dreams. In her nightmares, she wandered through the house, which seemed to stretch into an endless maze of glass corridors. Shadows flitted on the periphery of her vision, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though unseen eyes were always watching her. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the images from her dreams lingering in her mind long after she awoke. One particularly vivid nightmare involved her standing in the living room, staring out into the dark forest. As she watched, shadowy figures emerged from the trees, moving closer to the house. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and as they reached the glass walls, they pressed their faces against the surface, grinning wickedly. Sarah would wake up gasping for breath, her heart racing. Emma, the oldest child, was the first to verbalize her unease. She had always been a perceptive and sensitive girl, and the feeling of being watched had grown stronger for her. One afternoon, she was doing her homework at the kitchen table when she glanced up and saw a glint of light reflecting off something in the distance. It seemed to be coming from deep within the forest. Curious and slightly apprehensive, she squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the dense foliage obscured her view. "Mom, do you ever feel like someone's watching us?" Emma asked that evening as the family sat down for dinner. Sarah paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, and glanced at John. "Sometimes," she admitted, trying to sound casual. "But it's probably just the newness of the place. We're not used to living in a house like this." Jake, oblivious to his sister's concerns, continued to play in the spacious yard, building elaborate forts and exploring the nearby woods. However, even he began to notice small, unsettling details. Toys he had left in one spot would be moved when he returned, and footprints, not his own, appeared near the edges of the forest. At first, he thought it was just animals or maybe kids from a neighboring property, but the nearest house was miles away. One afternoon, Emma and Jake were playing hide-and-seek. Emma, hiding behind a large oak tree at the edge of the forest, spotted another glint of light. This time, she decided to investigate. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the sense of being watched intensified. She felt a chill run down her spine, but pushed on, driven by curiosity. She stumbled upon a small hidden clearing, where a strange metal device mounted on a tripod stood among the undergrowth. It looked like a high-tech camera or surveillance equipment aimed directly at their house. Emma's heart pounded as she realized the implications. Someone was watching them. She turned and ran back to the house, her fear giving wings to her feet. "Mom! Dad! You have to see this!" she shouted, bursting into the living room. John and Sarah exchanged worried glances and followed her into the forest. When they reached the clearing, they were stunned. Several similar devices were hidden among the trees, all aimed at the glass house. Each one was equipped with high-resolution cameras and sophisticated monitoring equipment. The discovery sent a chill down their spines. Who was watching them, and why? John dismantled one of the cameras and brought it back to the house. He examined the equipment, trying to determine its origins. His search led him to uncover a hidden compartment in the basement, containing a small room filled with computer servers and monitors displaying live feeds from the cameras. The realization that someone had been watching their every move was horrifying. The sense of security they had felt in their new home was shattered. Sarah's paranoia grew. She started noticing other subtle signs of intrusion, objects slightly out of place, unfamiliar footprints near the entrances, and the feeling of being watched constantly. They decided to contact the police, but when officers arrived, they found no conclusive evidence and dismissed their claims as paranoia. The family was left with more questions than answers. As they sat together in the living room that night, the oppressive weight of their situation bore down on them. They knew they had to uncover the truth before it was too late, but the unknown watchers seemed to be always one step ahead. The Johnson family's discovery of the surveillance equipment in the forest left them shaken. The realization that they had been watched from the moment they moved in was horrifying. Determined to uncover the truth, John and Sarah dove into investigating the house's history and the source of the surveillance. John began by examining the surveillance equipment they had found. He spent hours in the basement, meticulously dismantling the devices and searching for any clues. Each camera was sophisticated, equipped with high-resolution lenses and wireless transmitters that fed directly into the server room they had discovered earlier. The level of technology and the effort put into hiding the devices suggested that whoever was behind this was highly skilled and resourceful. Meanwhile, Sarah delved into the house's history. She scoured public records, old newspapers, and online forums, looking for any information about previous owners or unusual occurrences associated with the glass house. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon a disturbing pattern. The house had changed hands several times over the past few decades, and in each case the occupants had either disappeared or left abruptly under mysterious circumstances. Sarah found an article about the house's architect, a reclusive man named Victor Harlow. Harlow had a reputation for being eccentric and had designed several unique homes, but the glass house was his masterpiece. According to the article, Harlow had a fascination with surveillance and voyeurism, often incorporating hidden observation points into his designs. This revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. "John, you need to see this," Sarah called, her voice trembling. She showed him the article about Harlow and the disturbing pattern of disappearances. "I think this house was designed for someone to watch its occupants, and whoever it is, they're still here." John's face grew grim as he processed the information. "We need to find out where these cameras are transmitting to. Maybe we can trace the signal back to whoever is doing this." Using the server room as a base, John worked tirelessly to trace the signals from the cameras. He realized that the data was being transmitted to a remote location via a secure encrypted connection. It took him several days, but he finally managed to decrypt part of the signal and pinpoint its destination. A secluded cabin deep in the forest, about 2 miles from their house. Determined to confront the person responsible, John decided to investigate the cabin. He didn't want to involve the police yet, fearing they wouldn't take his findings seriously. He and Sarah planned their approach carefully, deciding to go under cover of darkness to avoid detection. That night, they left Emma and Jake with a trusted neighbor, explaining that they had some urgent matters to attend to. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, John and Sarah set out into the forest. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the dense woods, but every rustle and shadow made their hearts race. After what felt like hours of hiking, they finally spotted the cabin. It was a small, dilapidated structure, almost camouflaged by the surrounding trees. The windows were boarded up, and the only light came from a faint glow seeping through the cracks in the door. John and Sarah approached cautiously, their flashlights off to avoid drawing attention. John slowly turned the doorknob, and the door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with surveillance equipment, monitors, recording devices, and stacks of tapes and hard drives. The walls were covered in photos of the Johnson family, taken from various angles and locations around their house. It was clear that they had been watched for months, if not longer. As they explored the cabin, they found a series of journals detailing the activities of the house's previous occupants. Each journal described how the residents had been observed, manipulated, and ultimately driven to their breaking point. The final entries in each journal hinted at the occupants' fates, suggesting they had been abducted or worse. Suddenly, they heard a noise from a back room. John motioned for Sarah to stay back as he cautiously approached the door. Inside, he found a man hunched over a desk, intently watching live feeds from the cameras around their house. The man turned, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes. It was Victor Harlow. "Who are you?" John demanded, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "Why are you doing this?" Harlow smiled, a chilling, detached smile. "You're in my house. I designed it. I watch. It's what I do." Enraged, John lunged at Harlow, but the older man was surprisingly agile. He dodged John's attack and grabbed a concealed weapon from under the desk. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," Harlow hissed. "This house, It's more than just glass and steel. It's a canvas for my art." Sarah, hearing the commotion, rushed in to help. She grabbed a heavy object and struck Harlow, knocking the weapon from his hand. Together, John and Sarah managed to subdue him, tying him up with cords from the surveillance equipment. They called the police, who arrived and arrested Harlow. The officers were stunned by the extent of the surveillance operation and the evidence they found in the cabin. Harlow was charged with multiple counts of illegal surveillance, kidnapping, and possibly murder as the investigation into the disappearances of the previous occupants continued. As the police took Harlow away, John and Sarah felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. They had uncovered the truth and stopped Harlow, but the experience had left them deeply scarred. The glass house, once a symbol of their fresh start, had become a place of nightmares. They knew they could never feel safe there again. In the following days, the Johnson family moved out of the glass house, leaving behind the beautiful yet terrifying structure. They relocated to a new city, hoping to rebuild their lives far from the haunting memories. Though they tried to move on, the sense of being watched never fully left them, a constant reminder of the dark secrets that lurk behind seemingly perfect facades. Despite the Johnson family's successful confrontation with Victor Harlow and his subsequent arrest, their ordeal was far from over. The days following Harlow's capture were a whirlwind of police interviews, media attention, and a growing realization that their lives would never be the same. The once idyllic glass house now felt tainted, its walls a constant reminder of the malevolent presence that had watched them for so long. The family decided they needed to leave the glass house for good. They began making arrangements to move to a new city, far from the forest and its haunting memories. However, packing up their lives was no easy task. Each creak of the floorboards, each reflection in the glass, felt like a ghost of their trauma. The nights were the worst. The darkness seemed to amplify their fears, and the silence was filled with the imagined whispers of unseen observers. One particularly dark and stormy night, as they were packing their belongings, the power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. The familiar hum of the appliances and the comforting glow of the lights disappeared, replaced by the howling wind and the pounding rain against the glass walls. Panic set in as the family scrambled to find flashlights and candles. "Everyone stay together," John commanded, his voice steady but urgent. "We'll check the breaker and get the lights back on." As they made their way to the basement, flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls, they heard a noise from upstairs, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a door creaking open. Emma clung to Sarah's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Jake, trying to be brave, held onto John's hand tightly. John reached the breaker panel and found that the switches were all in the correct positions. "It's not the breaker," he said, frustration and fear evident in his voice. "Something else is going on." At that moment, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a series of thudding footsteps. It sounded as if someone, or something, was moving rapidly through the house. The family froze, their hearts pounding. John motioned for Sarah to take the children back to the basement while he investigated. "Be careful," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. John nodded and, armed with a heavy flashlight, cautiously made his way back upstairs. He moved through the darkened rooms, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The living room was empty, as was the kitchen. But as he approached the hallway leading to the bedrooms, he felt a cold draft, and saw that one of the bedroom doors was ajar. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, the room was empty, but the window was wide open, rain pouring in and soaking the carpet. John's flashlight beam caught something glinting on the floor, a small metallic object. He picked it up and realized it was a key. But to what? Meanwhile, in the basement, Sarah tried to keep Emma and Jake calm. "It's going to be okay," she said, more to reassure herself than the children. "Daddy will be back soon." But her words were interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. Sarah's heart raced as she shone her flashlight toward the stairwell, half expecting to see John. Instead, she was met with the sight of a figure standing at the top of the stairs, a figure she didn't recognize. The stranger stepped into the light, revealing a gaunt, pale face with hollow eyes. Sarah gasped, pulling Emma and Jake closer. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger smiled, a chilling, almost mechanical smile. "You thought it was over," he said, his voice eerily calm. "But it's never over." Before Sarah could react, the stranger lunged forward. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal pipe, and swung it with all her might, striking the intruder and knocking him down. "Run!" she screamed at Emma and Jake. They scrambled up the stairs, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they fled. As they reached the top of the stairs, they nearly collided with John. "We have to get out of here now!" Sarah shouted, breathless and terrified. John didn't need any convincing. Together they raced through the house, grabbing only the essentials. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a banshee. They bundled into the car, John fumbling with the keys in his panic. Finally, the engine roared to life, and they sped down the driveway, the glass house shrinking in the rearview mirror. The drive through the storm was harrowing. The rain lashed against the windshield, and visibility was almost zero. John gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Sarah kept glancing back, half expecting to see the stranger chasing them. But the road behind them remained empty, just a dark, rain-soaked ribbon stretching into the night. Hours later, they reached a small motel on the outskirts of a nearby town. Exhausted and shaken, they checked in and collapsed onto the beds. For the first time in what felt like forever, they felt a glimmer of safety. But as they lay in the dark, the events of the night replaying in their minds, they knew their lives would never be the same. The next morning, John contacted the police and reported the incident. Officers returned to the glass house to investigate, but they found no sign of the intruder. The open window and the key John had found were the only pieces of evidence. The police promised to keep an eye on the property and search for any clues, but their assurances did little to ease the Johnsons' anxiety. Determined to put the glass house behind them, the family moved to a new city, miles away from the forest and its haunting memories. They found a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, far from the prying eyes of unseen observers. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the scars of their ordeal remained. Sarah continued to have nightmares, the shadowy figures and cold, mechanical smiles haunting her dreams. John threw himself into his work, trying to rebuild a sense of stability for his family. Emma and Jake, though resilient, had moments of fear and anxiety, especially at night. Despite the distance, the sense of being watched never fully left them. They installed security cameras and motion detectors around their new home, constantly on guard against the unseen threats they now knew were real. And though they tried to move on, the memory of the glass house lingered like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of the fragile line between safety and terror. The Johnsons had escaped the glass house, but they could never escape the knowledge of what had happened there. They had uncovered the truth and confronted the darkness, but the experience had changed them forever. They lived with a new awareness of the world's hidden dangers, a vigilance that would never fade. And as they faced the future, they did so with the resolve to protect their family at all costs, knowing that some secrets are better left undiscovered.